the one who breaks the darkness with a liberating light. Praise the one who frees the prisoners, turning blindness into sight.
Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today's reading is from Genesis chapter 46. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones and their wives, in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now these are the names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Puvah, Yob, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. These are the sons of Leah whom she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, together with his daughter Dinah. Altogether his sons and his daughters numbered 33. The sons of Gad, Ziphion, Haggi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, with Sarah their sister. And the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath the daughter of Potiphera the priest of On bore to him. And the sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mapim, Hupim, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The sons of Dan, Hushim. The sons of Naphtali, Jaziel, Guni, Jazer, and Shillem. These are the sons of Bilhah whom Laban gave to Rachel his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph, to show the way before him in Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face, and I know that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, My brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, What is your occupation? You shall say, Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. This is the word of the Lord. Our text is a little scattered in some ways. We're going to see ultimately the theme being the family of Israel, Jacob and his family, moving down to Egypt to join Joseph there. But it's in 3 parts, really. The first part is Jacob visiting with God at Beersheba. And the second part, which is the bulk of the text, is actually then the listing of the descendants. And the third part is what happens when they get there and what Joseph starts to instruct them to do. So in the year 1876, I think it's pretty safe to say here, it's 1446 when they are going to leave Egypt under Moses, 1446 BC, and Exodus very clearly specifies that it was 430 years to the very day. So we're looking at 1876 BC, being when Jacob moves his family down. That would put Joseph's birth around 1915 BC, something like that, give or take a year. Jacob is going to go from where he is to Beersheba. So he's perhaps living to the north of it, although maybe just close by. He is going to Beersheba to worship God, and it would appear to seek God's directive in this. Sacrificing to God before he goes down into the land of Egypt. And indeed, God will speak to him, declaring who he is first, that I am God, God of your father, and then also reiterating promise, reiterating to Jacob what he has said before, that he's going to make him into a great nation. Go down to Egypt, I will also bring you up again. So the picture that God's restoration is still going to come. That they will go down, but they will come back. The promised land is still promised to them. However, just as it was once said to Abraham that he would die in peace, so it is now being said to Jacob, that Joseph's hand shall close his eyes, as a reference to his death. So Jacob himself will not return to the promised land with his eyes open. He will die in the land of Egypt, and Joseph will bring him home, which he indeed does. So as Jacob then sets out for the land of Egypt, taking with him everything he had, so not like Pharaoh's offer in chapter 45, verse 20, where Pharaoh said that he would give them the best of the land of Egypt. They didn't have to concern themselves about any of their things. So move in ready. But they bring everything anyway. The list of descendants is going to be organized not chronologically strictly, but instead it's going to go by wife. It's going to go Leah, and then her servant, and then Rachel, and then her servant. So Leah, Zilpah, Rachel, Bilhah. And then by those wives, it will be chronological in the order that they gave birth to their kids. So not an overall chronology, but broken up into parts. So we get Leah's 6 sons mentioned first, and then the 2 sons of Zilpah, the 2 of Rachel, and the 2 of Bilhah, in that order. Now, there's several ways you can handle this list as a family conversation point today. You've seen many of these names as you've read through the Genesis account over the last couple of weeks. Ask your children to pick out the names they recognize. Give them the opportunity to share stories that they remember reading, and perhaps reading or hearing from the previous chapters. What did Reuben do? Who's Reuben? What about Levi? What about Judah? Who was Dinah? It would be easy to have those kinds of opportunities for reflection on the history that you've been pouring through over the recent weeks. However, you can also take this in the future direction. Do we know what any of these men will do in the time to come? Now, there won't be a lot of that, but where you can really stress it ends up being, can you trace the lineage of Jesus? How does God keep his promise that he's going to make Jacob into a great nation? and reiterate that that promise is more than just that, but that Jacob, just like Abraham, would be a blessing to all nations, that his offspring would be a blessing to all people. Well, that's in Jesus. So how does that pass? And that's going to go from Leah's family through Judah, through Perez, through Hezron. And you can check that against the text in the genealogy of Jesus, both in Matthew and Luke's beginnings in the New Testament. Now, with the sons of Levi, you'll see those names mentioned probably the most prominently as you get to the rest of the Old Testament. Gershon, his sons, his tribe, will be the ones that end up carrying the curtains and the hangings of the tabernacle as they move it from place to place, those 40 years in the wilderness. The sons of Kohath will take charge of the holy things, so the various pieces of furniture, like the ark, the altar, the lampstand, they'll carry them. And the sons of Merari, they'll handle the bars, the pillars, the bases, the structural things. Let's see if there's anything else of note here amongst really any of the children mentioned in the chapter. Not particularly. So with the numbering here, something to pick up on, we have ultimately a list of 34 sons and daughters born through Leah, when you count grandchildren, and a couple of great-grandkids with Hezron and Hamul listed in verse 12. But the number listed in verse 15 is not 34, it's only 33. So what's that about? The easiest solution is that you simply subtract Dinah, as women are often not included in the numberings. So you come to when Israel leaves Egypt, they are 603,550 fighting men, which you can find in the beginning of the book of Numbers. Or you get the miracles Jesus does in the New Testament, the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. Those numbers refer only to the men present, but do not include the women present. So you're actually talking about the miracle being Jesus feeding more than 5,000 or 4,000, the way we would think of numbers today. And one of the reasons behind that could simply be the biblical idea of husband and wife being one flesh. They're no longer two, but one. There's a reality to that as Americans today we tend to deny. The biblical picture is something a little different, and it encourages us to think of our marriage in a much stronger context. That's one option, is simply to remove Dinah. The other option is that you remove and Onan because they're dead, and then you have to find a 33rd. You have to add one back in to the text. That doesn't seem as likely, and who you'd be adding in is, I don't really know, beyond me, unless there's another daughter who is simply not mentioned. Then you've got Gad and Asher. Together they make 16. That number is not hard to count to if you look at the text. Joseph and Benjamin add up to 14, also easy to get to. Note that Benjamin has 10 sons. Joseph at this point is 39. Benjamin is at least 6 years younger, so 33 at the oldest. There are some who argue that Benjamin was not alive when Joseph was sold as a slave at 17. I pretty firmly deny that. Grammatically, maybe it's an option from the Old Testament, but a couple of things. One, he's born to Rachel on the journey as you're reading your way through the chapters of Genesis, chapter 35. And so that seems pretty telling. So Joseph's born. Jacob asks Laban to leave. Laban gets him to stay another 6 years. On the journey home, back to Canaan, Benjamin's born. I'd probably say 7 or 8 years later if I were guessing, but not to the point of 17 years where Joseph's never met him before. This is honestly the strongest argument in favor of that. Benjamin has 10 sons. If he's 6 years younger than Joseph, which is the oldest he could be, he's 33. He could have 10 kids by 33. That's possible. But to say he hadn't been born yet when Joseph was sold as a slave requires him to be 22 or younger and yet have 10 kids already. That's much less probable. Anyway, worth pondering perhaps. Naphtali, Dan, together make 7, another easy one to count. So Leah produces the most offspring, Zilpah second most, Rachel third most, Bilhah fourth most, and interestingly, that's also the way that they're ordered in the text for us here. Now, when you get to the final paragraph of the numbering in verse 26 and 27, the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, not counting the wives of his sons, 66 persons in all. That also does not count Jacob. So you go back and you read the numbers. We got the 33 from Leah. The 16 would make 49. The 14, but you don't do Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh because they didn't come to Egypt. They were already there. So we would be at 33, 16, 49, plus 11 makes 60, and then Dan and Naphtali's group makes 67. So you're one high again if you go with the 33 number. And Onan didn't come. So, like before, I said we could easily get to the 33 by subtracting Dinah. Here we include Dinah, and we subtract and Onan, and that does give us 66. Now, when you then come to the final phrase that all the persons born in the household of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70, that then adds in Jacob, Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. 66 plus those 4 makes for 70. Anyway, 70 strong. When they first arrive in Goshen, they're going to leave, again with 603,550 fighting men, 430 years later, which that's just the men. You think of most of them being married and then having, kids. You're talking about a group of people that numbers over a couple of million, most likely, by the point of the Exodus. And Pharaoh feared them, as we know from Exodus chapter 1. Knowing that Judah has now made the journey twice, Jacob makes him take the lead, has him take point to carry him down, lead him down to the land of Goshen, and indeed they do. And then we get the family reunion, as Joseph sees his father again for the first time in 22 years. 13 years as a slave, 7 while the land produced bountifully, and then 2 years of famine. Jacob's response: "Let me die, since I've seen your face and know you are still alive. My dying wish, I've seen you, I can go in peace." That's basically what Dad says, much like his own father Isaac, who assumed he was on his deathbed and then ended up living for at least another 20 years. Here, Jacob assumes he's about to die, might as well be dead. He's 130 years old, we'll learn in tomorrow's chapter. He's going to live another 17 years, dying at the age of 147. So he lives 17 years after this little meeting with his son. So he's not done getting to know Joseph. It is kind of fascinating, though, that he has Joseph for 17 years when he's at the start of his life, and then Jacob's last 17 years will be with Joseph as well. All right, so Joseph is going to instruct them to speak to Pharaoh about how they're shepherds, that they've brought all their flocks, all their herds, they're shepherds, so their fathers before them been, because the Egyptians hold shepherds as an abomination. And I can't speak to that too much. I mean, we can look at today's culture around us. People that live in cities often look down on the people who live in the rural community. They have a disdain for farmers, which is kind of odd, as most of your food comes from farmers. It's unfortunate. We really shouldn't look down on each other. I think this more likely has something to do with their spirituality, but not knowing a lot about the various religious beliefs of the Egyptians and their polytheism, it's hard to say for certain. Anyway, we know it to be a fact. We know it to be true. Now, why? The question ends up becoming, why doesn't Joseph want them to live in Egypt proper? So why not move down by Pharaoh? Why not move down by where Joseph is living? Why stop in Goshen? I'm going to give you a few options here to consider. It could be that this would allow them to keep what God has given to them. So God has enriched Jacob and his household in the land of Canaan, giving them many livestock. And if they leave it all behind and now they're enriched by Pharaoh, maybe Pharaoh would brag, and maybe Jacob and the faith of his family would dwindle because they don't recognize God's provision. This is something Abraham talks about in chapter 14 when he rejects the offer of the king of Sodom giving him wealth. Didn't want the king of Sodom to be able to say that he had prospered Abram, but rather that God had. So that's one choice. A second option is that Joseph has now lived, again, 22 years in the land of Egypt, that he has seen their manner of life, and he doesn't want it to impact his family. He doesn't want his family to become Egyptian. Their spirituality, their false worship, and whatever else maybe he has seen. Maybe a certain level of hatred or animosity, maybe certain ways of violence amongst them, or just different cultural things that he didn't want to impact his own people. And the third option gets into the idea of empire building, which the book of Genesis is really against. It opposes it. It's bad that Nimrod does it earlier in the book, and it's good for man to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. God instructing man to spread across the face of the earth, not heap up into towers. So if they avoid Egypt and the city life, then they're able to live out on the land and care for the land. Those are three different options to ponder. A fourth thing to consider is that God ends up working through this also. Just as God worked through all of Joseph's deceptions in order to bring healing in the family, wondrously, God is going to work through God's people living in Goshen to show his power and distinction in the book of Exodus between the Egyptian gods and Israel's God. But the plagues will eventually start to only happen in Egypt, even though Goshen's right there. Goshen's going to be like a safe bubble. Nothing bad happens in the land of Goshen to God's people, but to everyone around them it does. So God will work through this also in the years to come. So it's a good family conversation, a way to reflect on what happened, but also how God was at work.
Let us praise the Word incarnate, Christ who suffered in our place. Jesus died and rose victorious, that we may know God by grace. Let us sing for joy and gladness, seeing what our God has done. Let us praise the true Redeemer, praise the